In this podcast episode, we want to introduce you to our BCEN friend, Nancy Denke. Come along as Michael Dexter and Holly Briggs talk with Nancy about her nursing career, which has led to her study of toxicology and a passion for collaboration with the patient care team. When it comes to solving the puzzle of what did my patient get into, Nancy is an expert in this field. This episode is called Talking Toxicology, a Recipe for Disaster.
Hello, and welcome to the BCEN and Friends podcast, where we hold interesting conversations about learning with a range of thought leaders, BCEN certification holders, and industry and professionals, but most importantly, to create value and insight for you, our professional nurses across the emergency spectrum. We hope you find our discussions interesting, informative, sometimes funny, sometimes serious, but always valuable. I'm Holly Briggs, a professional development specialist at BCEN, and one of your hosts for today. I'm joined by my co-host, Michael Dexter, Director of Professional Development at BCEN. Hi, Michael.
Hello, Holly. Good to be with you again.
Great to have you. In this episode of BCEN and Friends, we have Nancy Denke. Nancy is a nurse practitioner living in Arizona, where she's focused in on the topic of toxicology and teaching, which is exactly what she will be doing in May of this year at BCEN Learn Live in Dallas. Super excited to get some time with Nancy now and then. Michael, could you please introduce us to our BCEN and friend, Nancy?
Yeah, I would be happy to. Nancy, I've actually known for a little bit, as she did a webinar for BCEN and just did a fantastic job presenting on toxicology. And so I'm really excited we get to know her a little bit better on this podcast. She's a nurse practitioner, as you mentioned, in the Phoenix area. She's in Scottsdale, Arizona. She's lived and worked all over the U.S. She grew up in New York and went to Penn State as an undergrad. And years later, she'd returned to school at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, to earn her master's in nursing as a clinical nurse specialist, and then return a year later to earn her family nurse practitioner. She worked as a nurse practitioner in the ED throughout Colorado. And then when her husband transferred to the Phoenix area, she landed a job as the first trauma nurse practitioner for the system, and then transitioned over to a neuro-stroke position. And for the last 5 years has been working in a small toxicology practice in the Scottsdale area. Nancy also received her acute care nurse practitioner from St. Louis University and a DNP in leadership innovation at Arizona State University, where she has been teaching in the doctorate program from 2014. Nancy, welcome to the BCEN and Friends podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Good morning, Michael. Thanks. I'm really excited about this. I think that I want people to get excited about toxicology as much as I have.
Well, you definitely have a passion for it, and I want to hone in on that in just a second. But you have been a nurse and worked in a number of areas across the U.S. I know you did a lot of traveling and moving throughout your career, but could you tell us a little bit more about some of those places you worked, and then ultimately how you honed in on this topic of toxicology?
It all started after getting out of school. You would think that we were military the way that we moved around, but my husband works in higher education. So we moved where his jobs ended us. So after getting out of school, we moved to Kansas, where we spent about 9-10 years, which I loved, and loved the emergency department that I worked in. And I have to say that is where I first took the CEN exam. No one else in our department, other than my one friend and I, decided that the first year, and I'm really dating myself, I guess, we took the CEN exam. We had nothing to study from. We studied from what ACEP had out there, and we passed. And since that time, I've kept my certification. We went from Kansas to North Carolina, where the docs there, I worked at Wake Medical Center in Raleigh, and the docs there wanted to open a PEDS ED, and they were the ones that got me with the bug to go back to get my nurse practitioner. And of course, my husband made the decision that he wanted to move up. And so we ended up then moving from North Carolina to Colorado, where I then worked in the emergency department as a nurse practitioner, but also in an indigent pediatric clinic, which gave me some really good foundation for taking care of kids. We spent, a good 10 years there. And then we ended up moving to the Scottsdale area, where my husband works for the state. And I work now as this toxicology nurse practitioner. When I first moved down here, I worked at a system where I was working as a clinical nurse specialist, but we had some money problems within the system. And so my job was eliminated and went to where I am now in the system and took on the job as the trauma nurse practitioner. Did that for about, 8 to 9 years. My friend left the neuro stroke position. She said, why don't you do that? So I said, okay, I'm always up for something new. And I think that that's what's the good piece about being a nurse, that you could do all these neat things and you can always change what you're doing and you can always learn something new. So I took care of her job for a while. And then one of the ER docs, who is now the doc that I work with, came to me and said, hey, I need some help with my practice. And I said, well, that's good, but I have no idea about toxicology. And he said, yes, you do. You're a nurse. You've got the foundation. You know how to take care of the patients in the emergency department. From trauma, you know how to take care of the patients on the floor. He said, and I can just teach you all these other things. And the things that I can't teach you, we'll learn together. And that's where I am right now.
That is awesome, Nancy. I love how, you started out in one thing and kind of got your feet wet and got some knowledge and some experience, but then you ultimately moved into something that you didn't know that was going to be the passion for your career, but then it was, and it is. And I think that toxicology is just such an interesting subject. It's crazy to me how over the years there are just, and it sounds crazy to say, but there's just trends in ingestions and toxicology and like having to figure out almost like new ways that people poison themselves. If that sounds right. I mean, it sounds crazy to say that, but it's just true. We've seen, we went through a string of like where the Tide Pods were like the thing to do. And I did not understand that at all. But at the same time, I definitely had to take care of a couple of patients who decided that was something they were going to try. But what are some of the things that you have found that have been persistent and maybe kind of like long standing toxicology issues that you've come across and you've really seen like, this is something people really need to understand because it's not going away?
The one thing that won't go away, and that's the number one worldwide, is Tylenol. People think just because it's over the counter that it's safe. Motrin is another drug that will be there, but Motrin doesn't do as bad or leave the bad side effects as what Tylenol does. And because they think it's over the counter, that they can take it. Especially for teens, it's readily available. And they will look it up online and find out how much they can take before they can get really sick for it to cause them to have really bad side effects. But some of the stuff that's online is not giving them all the information. And a lot of them will not tell anybody that they ingested this. They will wait, and then all of a sudden they wake up, they have belly pain, they're having vomiting, they're having really bad nausea. After speaking to them when they come to the hospital or their parents finally figure it out, they may have ingested a toxic amount that they end up having to either, number one, be started on NAC or the N-acetylcysteine. Number two, they may end up with one of the newer drugs, Fomeprazole, so that we can help detoxify them a little better. Or number three, that they end up being dialyzed because not only does it affect their livers, but it affects their kidneys too. So it's not that over the counter, it's okay, it's not going to cause me harm. I think Tylenol is probably the biggest thing. One of the other things that I'm seeing, I'm not going to blow off the older people, but I'm looking at the adolescents right now, and Benadryl and like cough medicines is their big go-to. We learned back the mid 2000s and then recently the cough medicines, that what they will do is put them into their a coffee cup and drink all day long so that they could kind of have this euphoria and make them feel really good. Benadryl is really easy to get over the counter, and they will use the Benadryl to have that euphoria, but then Benadryl makes you crazy. You know enough what anticholinergics look like. They're red as a beet, mad as a hatter. And mad as a hatter really is the true piece to what's going on, especially with the Benadryl overdoses. So I think that those are a big thing. Little kids, gummies. We've seen an increase in the amount of gummy ingestions because they look like candy. And if dad and mom can have them, why can't I? And, they'll be put away, but little kids, toddlers especially, they're like monkeys. They could climb, get to wherever you need to go. They watch exactly where you put things, and they'll climb up onto the countertops and get into wherever it's been stored. So that's a big thing. And then we know about hand sanitizer. That's like alcohol on steroids. That's another piece to get ingested. So those are my big things that I'm seeing that you think that aren't really bad, but they can end up with really bad outcomes too.
Thank you for sharing those, Nancy. And all of the components that you mentioned are what I would consider like a straightforward, and that might not be the terminology for it, but like a straightforward ingestion. Like they come in and they have this high amount of a specific medication. But you and I have talked before that this profession of nursing and this sub-profession, I would say, of toxicology within nursing, you really have to be a detective and a nurse at the same time. Yeah. And some of these people don't come in with a straightforward ingestion. You don't even know what it is that's causing their symptoms. And on top of that, sometimes they have other chronic conditions. They're taking medications that have perhaps interacted with whatever they ingested that have then caused their condition. So how do you go through this whole detective thing of deciphering their history and their assessment and all that, when it seems like every time we turn around, there's more chemicals that are being released, there's more drugs that are coming to market, there's more substances? How do you keep all this stuff in order in your head? How do you get through it all?
Sometimes it's not straightforward in that respect. And, sometimes I hear from the docs, how did you get that information? And, the number one is, just because they ingested something doesn't mean that they're a bad person. Even if they're using street drugs, they're not a bad person. And if you sit down and you talk to them, first of all, if they're awake enough, they'll be more than willing to tell you what they've done, how they've done it. And, I have even learned how to make some of this stuff that they're making out there. But, treating them as a human being, I think that that's the top piece of it, because once you treat them as a human being, then they will give you whatever information that you need and be able to tell you. Now, it's the ones that are altered and out of it or really crazy that is really hard to do, because you're trying to figure out, number one, what's going on with the patient, but number two is how can I treat them safely? And that's the bottom line, is that we need to make sure that if we don't know anything, we're going to treat that patient. We may not be treating the substance that they do. We treat the patients, and we need to make sure that we take care of the ABCs. And then, the D, especially with kids or even for adults, is looking at what their glucose levels are. So just making sure that you go back to your basics, you keep them safe, and then you keep yourself safe, and then you take care of your ABCs. The other pieces that I look at are, number one, do they have a toxicodrome that I can kind of figure out? Is it their sympathomyometic, that their heart rates are up, their, pinpoint pupils that I'm thinking maybe they have a opiate, or what drugs did they have available to them? Is that's what's causing it? And a lot of times they have lots of drugs that are available to them. So is it this drug or that drug? And again, I'm not going to treat the drug. I'm going to treat what's going on with my patient. I look at their labs, and I really teach the nurses to do that. Look at their vital signs and look at their labs. The labs aren't there just for the docs. And a lot of the docs don't pay attention to those things. You're alcoholic. Oh, just because they're an alcoholic, I'll just kind of give them some fluids, give them a little bit of Ativan, get them, calm down and go on my merry way. But the other pieces are that we need to look at their electrolytes, because number one, they don't eat very well. They may have an anion gap. So, maybe they ran out of money to drink regular alcohol. So now they're going to get some radiator fluid or some antifreeze or what have you. And now they are really an ethanol glycol ingestion and not just an ingestion of alcohol. And we really need to be very cognizant of that so that they don't end up in renal failure. my piece is that I try to sit with the nurses and talk to them and explain to them, okay, these are the things that we need to look at. Well, how did you know that? Well, I know that this drug can cause these kind of things, and knowing what those drugs are and some of the side effects will help. But I don't care about, what the half-life of that drug is. I care about, is it going to cause them problems with their liver? Is it going to cause them problems with their kidneys? Are their liver and kidneys working well enough to kind of deplete what's going on? So there's a lot of other little things that I kind of look at that sometimes in emergency medicine we can't do because we don't have enough time, because there's always someone else waiting for them. For me, being able to take the time to be that detective and to look up all those things and then go to the nurses and try to educate them along with educating the physicians, I think that we as a team in this collaborative practice can work really well. But again, safety first for you and the patient, and just making sure you take care of ABCs. I think you can do a lot better taking care of these people.
Well, Nancy, I love how you come back to your assessment, come back to talking to your patient. And really, those are going to be the keys that'll help you get to maybe an understanding of how that patient, what's the root cause of their symptoms and their presentation. But really, it's going back to those pretty basic concepts within nursing and within patient care. And so it's once you get to this is what is causing this, or this is kind of the ingestion that we're dealing with. One of the things that I have seen that nurses can get concerned about is when the treatment is actually something that maybe they've never done before, never seen before. And as a baby nurse, I remember being told, and it definitely came in use, that if you have to grab multiple vials of anything, you really should question that order. If you have to go and pull a bunch of things to administer, and it's, more than a few vials, you really should question that order and question the dose. But there are treatments like high dose insulin or multiple vials of atropine that are used in the treatment of these specific ingestions. So have you encountered this? And really, in your role, how do you help kind of overcome that concern or that fear that the treatment is actually appropriate for what is this toxic ingestion?
Wow, that's a great question, because sometimes, again, it's that trust factor. It's not only the trust factor that you have with your patient, but the trust factor that you have with the staff that you work with. And I've been pretty lucky because I have been a nurse practitioner within the network. I work at 3 different hospitals right now, and one of them I've been with them for almost 20 years. And so, yes, I've seen staff move around, but there's still some core staff. And so those core staff will say, oh, good, Nancy's here. Nancy will take care of this. And so they've learned to trust me. And I think that has a lot to do with when I give them an order, they understand it. Even when the docs, because there's sometimes the docs don't know what to do. They may have learned it in their practice as a resident, but they kind of forgot about it because there's other things that they're trying to remember. And emergency medicine person, you're a generalist. You have to know everything about everything. And for me, I've gotten to the point that I've kind of narrowed things down. And so some of those things that they kind of remember but don't remember are always there. The other piece that helps, if you have a pharmacist in your emergency department, having that pharmacist be another brain there to help out. And if they're hearing or seeing that you and the emergency doctor and the pharmacist are all talking together and making these decisions as a collaborative kind of thing, people will do what needs to be done at that point in time, because it's not just, well, Nancy said, and so I'll do it. It's not, because we all work together to make those decisions. Do we think we need to do another thing? And then the other piece is when I am at a standstill, I call Dr. Kwan and say, help me out here. I'm not sure what else to do. We've done this, this, and this. And he'll say, oh, just go give him another dose. And it's like, that could kill a bull, but we see what some of these people have ingested, and sometimes you're not going to kill that bull because it's way past there. So I think number one is going to be people trust you. You get a rapport with them. You collaborate with the nurse, the pharmacist, the doc, whoever else is there, and making sure that you can get a game plan together, and that they see that it's based on the evidence that it's going to get this patient to the best place that they can be.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect response, Nancy, is that collaborative effort with each one of them. And I've run into that situation myself a few times when the nurse is like, that's way too high of a dose. I don't feel comfortable. You push that or whatever. And just getting somebody else on the phone to help reaffirm, it is high for most people, but in this case, it's what's needed. It just makes everybody feel a lot better about some of these things we have to do. And I did want to ask you about some unique situations. So, you're talking about medication ingestion. You talked about ingesting hand foam or like the rubbing alcohol, these type of things. But there's also toxic substances outside of chemical compounds, like plants and animals that have toxins or produce these systemic effects. So just out of curiosity in your practice, and again, because you live in the Southwest area and you have both animals and plants that can produce toxins, do you have any interesting stories or interesting encounters from an animal or a plant toxin?
Plants not as much. I don't know why. I mean, maybe our stuff is not as pretty as everywhere else because, cactus, yes, and it's not really a toxin, but they cause you to get the cactus needles in you. And then again, what's that tape called? Oh gosh, I just lost the name. Anyway, using tape to pull out those needles are not fun. I can tell you that everybody knows about rattlesnakes and to stay away from them and taking care of them. But, people don't understand about scorpions. Scorpions, they may be small, but they're mighty. And especially they're mighty against the youngest of our species and the oldest of our species. Middle-aged people, young people, we do pretty good with scorpion stings, but the kids don't do very well. And I can tell you, I had one kid that looked like the exorcist. So scorpion stings cause neurotoxicity. And so you will see that they have their cranial nerves are all out of whack at this point in time. So you'll see kids having a lot, I can't even describe how many secretions that they have, so that you're sitting there suctioning them. You touch them and this electricity goes through them and they can't sit. They look like they're seizing, but they're really not seizing. They have their pupils. They have what's called opsoclonus. So it's, we talk about nystagmus making their eyes go side to side, but this is making their eyes not only go side to side, but kind of rolling around. And it's scary. It's not scary only for the parents. It's scary for the nurses. It's scary for the physicians. And it's scary for me because these kids can get in a lot of trouble, along with the older people can get in a lot of trouble because of their airways and because their airways get compromised. Remember, I said cranial nerves, and we're talking about not only eyes, but all the secretions causing them to have airway difficulties. So there is a antivenom, just like there's an antivenom for snake bites, but the antivenom, unfortunately, a lot of insurances will not pay for it. And a vial of the antivenom, depending on where you get it, is between $1,000 and $3,000. And so having that conversation sometimes with patients that come in, and yes, they have the burning and stinging and even the numbness. Those aren't going to be those bad symptoms. The bad symptoms are the ones that come in with the airway compromised. And those are the people, or those are the patients that I need to make sure that I'm giving them the antivenom and making sure that I document well that hopefully the insurance company will pay for. But these kids, you end up, I've learned, and I can tell you, excuse my French, but I get sphincter control at this point in time because I give them a vial of antivenom. It goes in over about 10 minutes, but then waiting for that medication to work. And sometimes it takes almost an hour to work. There are some places that will give ding, ding, ding with the vials. And a lot of times you don't need to do it. A lot of times you need to just, again, watch the patient, treat the patient, make them safe. And then at like 55 minutes, all of a sudden, this kid will wake up and say, can I have something to eat? Or, what's going on? Why are you looking at me? It's just like this light switch went off. And it's really kind of cool to see, but it's really painstaking for parents and for us. So, scorpions are one of the things that come to mind. Oleanders around here, you might see it in the South a lot more also. And it gives you kind of ditch effects. And I've had 2 kids with oleander ingestions, not only the flowers, but the leaves. Again, just watching them, and those are the big things. So if I had to pick, I pick scorpions over plants.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I've seen some video of a couple of children that had scorpion stings, like you're mentioning, with the eye movement and the constant jerking and twitching. That does look a lot like a persistent seizure, and it's scary just watching the video. I can't imagine being the nurse trying to administer the antivenom and taking care of that patient. So
yeah, and that's why I stay with the patient and with the nurses, just to help them, again, make sure that they know that they are as responsible as I am. I'm going to be there with you and go through this. And that's where I've kind of built up some of the trust too with them.
Well, you have worked in a number of areas, as you mentioned, across the United States. And I know you're not only working in toxicology now, but you're also instructing at Arizona State University. And you have done quite a bit, and you've inspired quite a few others, and we certainly appreciate that. But who's inspired you? Is there a certain person, maybe a patient, maybe a moment in your career? We always like to ask our podcast guests if there's somebody that's really made an impact on you as a professional.
There's been many people, and there's 2 that I can think of. One was a nurse in the emergency department when I was 10 years old. My brother ended up going through a window and getting sliced pretty well in his arms, because he went through the glass window and brought his arm back. And at that point in time, there was no EMS system. So my neighbor, my father was at work. My mother was at the grocery store. My grandfather that lived with us didn't drive. So my neighbor, drove us to the hospital. And this woman that was in the emergency department, thank God she knew her dad and my dad worked together. So, she was able to take care of me that way. But I went with my brother, and I just watched what they were doing and had a great time. And she said to me at that point in time, you are going to make a great nurse, and allowed me as a candy striper to work in the emergency department and to be able to see what was going on. And then the second person probably is Frank Cole. I don't know if any of you know Frank, but Frank was a nurse practitioner. He helped lead the first EMP tracks. And he was really good friends with one of my instructors at Carolina. When I was in the family nurse practitioner program and I was in the CNS track, Randy said to me, did Frank not teach you well enough that this is not what you want to do? You want to be a nurse practitioner. And I think that was the best piece, because while Frank was alive, we worked together. We did some things with ENA. We were able to help with procedures. And I always said I wanted to be just like Frank. So I think those are the 2 people that have made a big difference in my life.
That is awesome. I think it's interesting to hear the reflection of not only when you were a child, like having an experience watching someone just, do their job and do it well. And then that is something that really just sticks with you. You may not remember that person's name. You may not remember like all the finer details, but just watching them as a young person give care and do it well and make you feel comfortable to where you felt like, yes, the situation itself was not great, but I had a good time. I learned, and I was able to kind of go through a difficult situation, but in the best way, because someone took the time to make me feel comfortable and to educate and to kind of move through that. So I think that's really, really cool. And it's always impactful to me that as we journey on our career and we move into different places and different specialties and different parts of our professional journey, someone comes along and they encourage and challenge and really push you to grow. And then those people, I think sometimes that they don't even realize in that moment how much that is going to stick with you, like how much their just belief, kind of almost like they see this future vision of who you can be, and then them just kind of challenging you to grow. I really think that they don't realize in the moment maybe what they're doing, but it becomes something that you reflect on and you realize, man, thank you for being that person for me. And so that question always just, it makes me reflect on those people who have helped me along the way. But I'm also just, sometimes we don't even know the person's name, or sometimes we do know that person's name, but either way, I don't think they knew in that time that like, oh, I'm really going to impact this person for the rest of their career, but yet they do. So thank you for sharing that, Nancy. I really appreciate that. I do have a few questions. This is kind of like our rapid fire questions, and really they're about like your favorites, and just to get us to know you a little bit better, because I could honestly sit on this podcast and we could talk about toxicology. You could tell us all the weird and crazy and unique and awesome things that you've done, but I also want to get to know you just outside of that. So if you were not doing what you currently do, what would be like another role that you could do anything, let's say, what would it be if you were not doing what you currently do?
Well, if I had to pick another role, it would still be staying and doing something with nursing, maybe working with them one-on-one. And that's probably why I went to the ClinSpec piece, so that I could sit by the nurses and teach them. But you know what? If I wasn't a nurse, then I probably would be in a bake shop and making baked goods, because I think that always makes people feel good. And nobody ever comes to a bakery and complains with you. So I think that would be the best thing.
Okay, I have to ask, what is it that makes you happiest to bake?
Because lemons are out. I've been making lemon bars and anything that has lemons to do with it. They make everybody happy, and everybody loves lemon bars. So that's my go-to right now.
I wish we were closer. We could get some lemon bars, Michael.
Yeah, you could come. But let me tell you, I unfortunately, made some to bring to somebody that brought me the lemons, because, my neighbors give it to me. And then it's like, oh, could you make me these? Or somebody else wants them too. So
you already have orders at your non-existent bakery, your home bakery, I should say. Awesome. Well, in keeping with that, I'm going to ask you a few of your favorites. So what's your favorite book? And again, this can be a book that you're reading currently that you really would recommend, or just your favorite book all time.
All right. Well, it's not one favorite. It's just probably an author. I don't know if you've ever read Janet Ivanovich's books, but they have to do with a person that's, from the East Coast. And I just feel like I'm living her life, because I could see some of my family in the things that she does. And this is a bail bondsman that's going after somebody. It's easy reading and fun. And, you could read probably the book in one night. It has nothing to do with what I work with.
I enjoy authors who write in such a way that I am making the book come alive in my mind, and that it's like easy. I also enjoy when it's different than things that I do on a professional level. So I very rarely read fictional books that are surrounding like medical, but I do enjoy like a really good like murder mystery and like detective book, or something where, yes, I understand some of the things because of my professional background, but it's so wildly different. And again, sometimes I think when some of these books that I really enjoy get made into movies or TV shows or whatever, I'm like, that's really not how it should have been. Like, my mind made it so much better than what they did. And I enjoy, what they try to do, but I'm like, guys, the movie I made in my head was so much better than what y'all came up with. But speaking of movies, what is your favorite movie? Again, it can be all time or just one that you would recommend for us.
There's two, because number one, I love Blindside. I just love how the family took in this kid that had nothing and how they really taught him what to do. And then the other one, I love Viola Davis and her Woman King. I thought was a great movie, and I'm really upset that she had not won a whatever Academy Award for it, because she did an awesome job in there.
I actually have that movie on my list.
It's awesome.
It's sitting in my ever-growing list of things to watch, but it's closer to the front than it has been in a while. And so that's exciting. And I enjoyed The Blind Side for a lot of reasons. The dynamic of a family, and just this idea, the story was really like, it's about sports, but it really came to, no, it's about family, and how each one really did impact the other. And I think that play on words, The Blind Side, I'm like, I think really like the family that ended up, adopting this, young boy that they didn't know, how he kind of blindsided their life. Like he came out of nowhere and changed their lives just as much as they changed. And so I love that. So such a good recommendation. And maybe I'll have to move The Woman King up a little bit closer to the front.
Yes, you need to, because I think it's an awesome movie. So
it looks really good. Again, I'm just sadly one of those people. I'll be, ooh, that's good. And I'll add it to a list. And then before I know it, I've basically spent the entire night adding things to a list instead of actually watching anything. So my list gets a little long. Okay. Moving on. Last one for favorites is, what is your favorite song?
Can I have two again?
No, that's fine.
Yeah, because there's two that, Colorado Roots has to be Rocky Mountain High. And I love that before I even moved to Colorado, but it meant a lot more to me when we lived there. And then the other thing is the song, Don't Worry, Be Happy, because I think, if ever there's bad days, for some reason, it comes on the radio when I'm driving home. So I've decided that has to be my good song. So.
And it's crazy to me. Sometimes a song will play and I'll hear it, and whatever's happening in that moment, like then it becomes kind of like that anthem. And then when I hear it again, I'm like, oh, and it's just, it's kind of strange and wonderful how that will happen. And then it turns out to be something where you're like, man, I just needed to hear that song today. I will ask you, what is like a comfort food or a meal that you really enjoy?
Has to be pizza. There's no other food that's the comfort food. It's pizza. And it's either going to back to when I grew up. That was one thing that we always had every Friday. My grandparents lived in the same house as us. So that, my grandmother would make homemade pizza, and I still do that too. So I think that's our comfort food.
Okay. I have to ask, pineapples or no pineapples?
It's just plain, when you're a New York Italian, it's all just plain. People call now margarita. That's what we just called, was plain pizza.
Thank you. I really cannot. This is one of those controversial topics, but I really cannot get behind fruit that is not a tomato being on a pizza. Like I'm not for it. So sorry.
But thank you.
Sorry to those who don't agree, but my opinion will not be changed. So do you have any go-to recommendations for like self-care or something that you found that just really helps you to reset as you're going throughout your busy and very full professional life?
If I can go and get a massage, that's number one. Once my pool heats up, just getting in my pool and being able to just get in the pool and just kind of forget about everything. If I can start swimming, then that helps to take away all those stressors that I had. So those are my two go-to.
Well, Nancy, thank you for sharing all of that with us. And now I'm hungry for pizza, actually.
It's Friday.
But I really have enjoyed getting to know you more. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, you did that webinar last year and did such a fantastic job. And I know you're speaking in Dallas, but just getting to chat with you, getting to know you more, it's really been fun and enjoyable. So thank you for being on this podcast with us and sharing about yourself and sharing more about this whole toxicology realm of nursing that we have to live in from time to time as ED nurses, and that you get to live in on a day-to-day basis. So we appreciate your expertise and you sharing with us.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun, and I really appreciate the time you spent with me.
I want to take this time to thank Nancy for joining us for this episode of BCEN and Friends. Thank you, Nancy, for sharing your knowledge, your time, and your passion with us. And we are looking forward to spending some more face-to-face time with you at Learn Live in Dallas in May. It's the 15th through the 17th of 2023. To see the agenda, to get registered, you can go to bcn.org/BCN Learn Live. You do not want to miss it. And to all of our listeners, we hope you will stay tuned as we continue with BCEN and Friends and bring you new and meaningful content and perspectives. If you have a suggestion for an episode, please email us at bcn@bcn.org. I'm Holly Briggs, here with Michael Dexter, and on behalf of the entire BCEN team, we thank and celebrate you for all that you're doing as professional nurses across the emergency spectrum. Until next time, we are out.